recording message? I did not. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. All right. Good morning, everyone. Then I am calling this meeting of the Public Safety Communications Task Force to order. It is 11:16 on November 5th, 2025, and I'm Barbara Neal. As a reminder, the meeting is being recorded and we'll post that recording to the website after the meeting. Let's start with our roll call. Please verbally acknowledge your presence when I call your name. Dan Batesy.
Here.
Paul White.
I'm here.
Ron Kumitz.
Here.
Okay, Jim Mack.
Here.
Michael Wright.
Yep, just jumped on. Good morning. Here.
Good morning. And I don't see Mike Dungus yet, but we'll keep an eye out for him to join. Okay, and also joining us today, of course, is Emily Mullaney from Department of Public Safety as our administrative support, and our project management partners, Rick, Dom, and Elizabeth from Televate. And we have Phil Sisk here today from Mission Critical. So, and I think that covers everyone. I don't see any members of the public just yet on the call. So let's move on to approval of the agenda. The agenda was distributed to task force members. It's available on the website. Do task force members have any proposed changes to the agenda? Alrighty, hearing nothing, we'll consider the agenda approved. And I see Jason's joined us from Mission Critical as well. Good morning, Jason.
Good morning.
Okay, so let's move on to approval of the minutes. These would be the minutes from last week, October 29th, which was regular meeting number 63. Do we have a motion to approve those minutes?
I guess I'll make that motion.
Okay.
Seconded.
All right. And Paul, you look like you were going to say something. Is there any discussion, or were you just trying to make the motion?
I was just trying to make the motion, and I guess I would suggest, since I was present and Ron was not for that meeting, maybe I should be the one to make the motion and Jim second.
I agree with that.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. It is done. Paul has made the motion and Jim has seconded it. Is there any discussion? Okay. All in favor of approving the minutes from October 29th, raise your hand or signify by saying aye.
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 Okay. The minutes are approved. And let's move over to project updates, and Dom, go ahead.
All right, thank you, and good morning, everyone. The focus on the task force has been on the working groups. Most recently, we are trying to get all the recommendations and associated funding and details together for the December 1st deadline for the legislature. At last meeting, last week, we reviewed all the preliminary recommendations from the working groups, the tier 1, 2, and 3 working groups, and we identified how those were classified as whether they were organic and inorganic, and had some discussion on those. We are also currently working on reviewing those further. Televate is looking at those and determining, based on the recommendations, what potential legislative ask would be required for each of those recommendations. Hopefully we can review that at an upcoming task force meeting. The ongoing working group is funding and cost sharing. We did have our second meeting on Friday, and our third meeting is scheduled for this Thursday. We are also trying to put together recommendations from that working group, which can be presented to the task force, hopefully by either next call or certainly by the 19th. And we can go into, I guess, a little bit of the status of the funding working group, although I think that's a separate agenda item, so I'll defer that for a minute.
Okay. Thank you, Dom. Questions for Dom?
If I could supplement Dom's status, we have also received, I would suspect the majority of the responses from our Vermont League of Cities and Towns survey. And I'm happy to present, we prepared a few slides if you want to, get an overview of some of that. We also, plan on assembling that, the full responses into a document for task force review. But we're getting some very, we got a lot of really involved people to respond to the survey. And so it's valuable information, and I'm happy to share a little bit of it now and to provide the task force, kind of a few pages review of it, if you like. We can summarize some of the key contents. So first question is, would you suggest that we provide you a summary report on what we've received so far, or, of the report? So we can do that. It's a fair, right now, everything's in a spreadsheet, and we can put that into a Word document and summarize it. If that's of interest, that's what we'll do.
I think that would be helpful. What do others think? Dan's nodding, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Would
helpful.
Would you like to
Thank you,
go,
Michael.
maybe to provide a little bit of overview of some of the findings now? I've got a couple of slides and just highlighted a few,
Sure.
Key responses. So we can do that now as part of the status report, or we could just
Yep.
conclude that in the report.
Yeah, no, I think a quick review now would be helpful. I'm kind of curious what came back.
Okay,
and
well,
it fits in with a Televate update, so go ahead.
okay. All right. Well, buckle up, because there's some interesting findings. No, just kidding.
Oh, boy.
Of course. But,
Oh, boy.
but yes,
You
the
should have
findings,
presented it that way before.
what we're receiving is very helpful and very useful. So let me pull up the slide.
Wait, I don't have my popcorn.
No, that's not it. This should be it. Okay, let me know when you can see my screen, because I can see my screen, but I can't see you all. So
We can see it.
all right, very good. All right, so we have received 29 responses as of November 4th, 2024, 2025. I'm living in the past here. Sorry about that. I will make a, Josh. Okay. All right. So the responses, these 29 responses came from really executives, town and municipal managers, select board members, police and fire chiefs, planning commissioner chair, and a few other manager level individuals. And so, while I'm not going to go through all of the questions, I'm going to go through a few of them. And so the first question I go through: does your community experience gaps in emergency dispatch services? There were 10 yes and 19 no. And while there is a lot more, content that the responders provided, I'm just going to go through a few of the key ones. Difficulty in receiving emergency dispatch service requests from mobile phones. Multiple responders responded to that. So the question was, where I have an issue, and they're saying that we have challenges receiving mobile phone call requests for 911 services, which I don't think is any mystery to all of us. I mean, we know the quality of cellular service there. Multiple responses where they're also receiving issues with requests from IP phones. Some answers: delays in having calls answered, 911 not calling our fire dispatch agency, difficulty in receiving emergency dispatch services from mobile phones. That's similar to the one above. Paging is very spotty, and phone services also. Interoperability, no CAD, reliable radio messaging. There was one complaint about the quality of the dispatch service from the Massachusetts center, and one from the New Hampshire dispatch center. Does your community experience significant challenge regarding the delivery of public safety dispatch services? There was 15 yes and 14 no. Police, fire, emergency medical responders take longer than expected to arrive. I think we had anticipated there'd be some answers for that because of volunteers and variety of other purposes. The cost of dispatch services was a challenge. Communications with emergency dispatchers are challenging. There was multiple responses for that. Failed or incorrect times, lack of adherence to policy, confusion when tones don't trip, seems to be higher turnover of dispatchers, and they may not know our area. How much does your community pay annually for public safety dispatch services? We, out of 29, we received 23 responses, which is valuable because this is an element that we were trying to get a handle on. And what we want to do with this is really to align them, these responses to the particular center, so that we can, and also to the population of their communities that their responses came from, so that we could have a better understanding of perhaps on a per population basis they're paying. Do you think that the cost of dispatch services are delivered at a fair cost to your city or town? 17 yes and 12 no. Dispatch could be more efficient if done on a statewide basis through an alternate revenue source to the property tax. We provide dispatch services for roughly 20 communities at less than half the cost of providing these services on a per call basis. This is this creates an over $1 million hole in our budget that we are actively looking to close. Regional dispatch is a drain on the town budget, but it's not clear how to restructure it more fairly. The fee we pay isn't equitable compared to neighboring or similar sized towns and with similar sized departments. Border dispatch overcharges all small Vermont towns because we do not have the service in Vermont. It is very expensive, and I would prefer to get more for the money we pay. Northern border dispatch is taking advantage of northeastern Vermont towns with low populations that were otherwise abandoned for Vermont. And I wanted to end it with a very positive. Really, we get more than what we pay for. So there wasn't all negative responses, and these aren't all of them, but there's some good insights here. And just finally, in order to, I thought there's a really salient information in here, and this is here's where the responses became very prolific, and there are many sentences, and perhaps, and as I'll show you, one responder actually provided us with a formula and I would say put in a considerable amount of time.
Hey,
In
Rick,
order to make the
Rick,
cost, yes.
Rick, can I interrupt you? Because I see Ron's hand is up, and I think
Yes,
maybe
of
you might
course.
have a question on the previous. Sorry, Ron,
Yes,
go
of
ahead.
course, Ron.
It is sort of a question, sort of a comment. When you look at the costs that you receive from those dispatch agencies, in addition to population, I'd really like to see a correlation with the number of calls that those agencies get, because there are a lot of factors that determine how many calls a specific town have that go above and beyond just the very basic number of people they have. It's economics and various other things. So I think the only fair way to look at the cost that they're paying for dispatching is to relate that to the number of calls that they are actually having dispatched.
Ron, I fully agree that the formula, the equation for assessing what is a fair price is actually being looked at by the funding and cost sharing group, and we're looking at a couple of models. I will do exactly what you asked. However, I don't know. Well, I'm quite sure that the breakdown of the calls, Mr. Critical Partners collected total calls, but I don't have them broken down per particular community. So, but I can definitely kind of model it in such a way that the total amount of calls is a percentage of the population for the total area, or some reasonable way to model it. But I think the way we model it is going to be useful, because it is an exact effort that the funding group is looking at as well, because what is a fair and equitable means of allocating the costs on a per community basis, and that's one of the things that group is looking at. So we'll model it in such a way to provide a couple of other variables, but the easiest one, of course, is population. But you're right, it calls and looking at the a couple of other elements as well, economic elements.
And I'll just re-emphasize my concern over that model is that we will get an increasing number of small communities who will say, my cost of dispatch has to be low because I'm a low user. And while I certainly agree that there's a difference between St. George and Burlington, I also want to emphasize that if we only make a formula based upon usage, it's impossible to account for the smallest communities because they're not using the dispatch service on a per call basis. They're using it on a 24-hour basis. And there's at least a base cost that has to be there that says you are paying for the ability to use this, even if you're not using it. So I just want to make sure that that's getting raised every time we have this conversation.
I think some of the answers, Dan and Ron, that we've received, and again, this is just I've taken a snippet, and I didn't take a snippet in any means to try to bias what you're seeing right now, but this is kind of the responses to this section are salient to this conversation. In order to make the cost of public safety services equitable for communities throughout Vermont, what metric or combination of metrics do you think the cost should be based on? So there were multiple that said call volume and population, as Ron just said. Number of calls, multiple. Property levels, grand list per capita, call volume, amount of social services provided. State should provide emergency services dispatch to all public safety entities in Vermont to get out of the dispatch business. There are many layers, taxes, and funding schemes supporting the current piecemeal patch dispatch systems in Vermont. Combo of population and usage, updated on a rolling average of a few years. Dispatch services should be free to communities of less than 2,500 people. The fairest way would be to base the cost, if applicable, on the number of calls received in the previous year. Not the grand list. I would prefer a number of calls of population or even a utility tax. A weighted formula based on the total cost of dispatching by percentage of total calls, percentage of grand list, and percentage of population. Population, possibly call volume, if there's a tiered approach, which considers the magnitude of the call being taken. Not all calls or costs are created equal. And I highlight this one responder included a very detailed formula based on population and rolling call volume, and that individual must have taken at least an hour or more to create the formula, or perhaps they've been thinking about it a long time because it's very comprehensive. So we'll put this together, and any questions? I mean, obviously this is a sampling of the 29 responses, and we'll roll them up into a more robust report for everyone.
Okay.
Any questions for me?
I don't see any hands going up now. Do you have any, I guess I have one question. Was there any more information on the difficulty getting calls from VoIP phones? Do we know what okay.
So if I don't know if you recall the survey, but we listed a couple of boxes and then gave the responder an opportunity to fill in their own answers. And so some of them checked the box of a VoIP phone, but didn't provide any information. Now they did. I think all but one provided their contact information. They were happy to share who they were, and we would have an opportunity to reach back to anyone because they did provide a name and a contact information. I'm sure the majority of these folks are very well known by the task force members.
Okay. All right. And then if there's any detail on who submitted the question about 911 not calling our fire dispatch agency,
Yep.
I'd be happy to follow up separately with whoever that is to figure out what the problem is there.
I'll share that information directly with you, Barb.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so any questions for Rick or Dom on the Televate updates? Okay. Mission critical. I have you still on the agenda for updates. Is anything you'd like to add at this point?
Not at this time, just answering questions as they come back from Televate and stand ready to help.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Okay, Dom, let's go back. I think we want to go back now to a little bit more discussion on the funding and cost sharing working group status.
Yes, thanks. As we mentioned, we had the second meeting of the funding and cost sharing working group on Friday, and we have one scheduled on Thursday. We're hoping to have preliminary recommendations that we can bring to the task force following either that third meeting or potentially a fourth one, hopefully next week. The work has been focusing on the existing budget, the existing task force budget, and how that funding could potentially be used to fund the recommendations that have been coming from the working groups. So we have developed a spreadsheet with that budget and some initial values that are being discussed further. We're also discussing potential sources of revenue for additional funding, whether or not that would be considered by the legislature. We don't know, but at least we're providing some potential options that we've seen used in other areas. Rick may have some additional detail he wants to provide. That's basically what I have.
Yeah, the only detail I would provide is that Paul and Dan are active members of the working group, and they may have something to contribute. I would like to say though, one of the reasons that we're revisiting this topic was that would it be required to bring back to the full task force to complete? And I personally don't think that that's going to be necessary, but I'll leave that up to Paul and Dan. We've made really good progress over the first two meetings. And as Dom said, one more meeting at the maximum, two more meetings, we should have it. And, there's a number of really good perspectives that were brought up. In terms of not telling the legislature where the funding will come, but providing them some options and some examples that other states are leveraging, as part of allow them to come up, with a plan. We can help provide them some insights, options, but there's a lot of good discussion and creative, creative discussion it's going to lead us to a good, I think a good ending point. But I'll leave anything left to say up to Dan and Paul.
Dan or Paul?
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot of other updates beyond that. Paul?
No, nor do I.
Okay.
We're meeting this Friday. I'm sorry, we're meeting tomorrow, right?
Tomorrow.
Yes.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that there's progress being made, because that's a tough topic. So good. Well, thank you for the update. Anything else, Rick or Dom, to add on that?
Not for me, Barb.
Nothing here.
Okay. Okay, so going back to the agenda here, we're on to the governance discussion and vote. So at the last meeting, we discussed a number of things. One was the input that I had from 911 board members about reservations about taking this on without additional legs under it, but that they are open to further communication. The task force discussed whether two parallel boards would be redundant. how the logistics would be of those two boards working in tandem, maybe repurposing the ECAC to create the governing body, and the option to set up the parallel board with the intention of merging with the 911 board at some point down the road. So we were going to spend this week pondering the alternatives. And so I will open this up now to discussion on the results of those ponderings. What are people thinking? I'm thinking you're still pondering. Let's see if I can get a thought together here to kind of start the discussion. I think I have heard concerns about the costs of standing up a governance group and making sure that we're using whatever funding's available effectively. I think we want to acknowledge that in whatever recommendation we do come up with, that all of this work costs money, and are we using it the best way we can? A couple of thoughts that occurred to me, I'm not putting these forward as like recommendations, just points for discussion, is we could recommend expanding the existing task force membership to include some of that additional membership that was identified. We would have to account for additional consulting costs in our plan for the 9 million, or the remaining 9 million. And I think it would be good to include a deadline by which any governance model we come up with, let me see, I wrote this out. Let me see what I wrote. Include a deadline by which the governance model would complete its initial work. We would define the scope and provide a recommendation for merging or not with the 911 board. So I would put the development of a recommendation about whether and when to merge with the 911 board as part of the work of the new governance group. So anyway, those are three thoughts that I had. Does anybody want to add more or say you're nuts or what?
Well, Barb, I'll just add that I think it's going to be a very difficult political landscape to roll out funding for personnel and for ongoing administrative capabilities. I'm not saying it's impossible, nor am I saying that we necessarily shouldn't if it's the right thing, but I am reticent just in that notion that I think there's going to be a lot of pressure against that with a current budget. But and perhaps we ought to have some alternatives if we hit the legislature and they take on that same reticence, right? So if we get there and they say we have no appetite for adding people or ongoing salaries to this process, I think we ought to have a plan B that they can choose from.
Right. That's a good idea. And I also think we might want to identify work that can be advanced, right, outside of a new governance group. That being, in what comes to my mind is real quickly is the Rapid SOS and the CAD. That could still move forward if there's no appetite for a larger group. So it's almost like we would want to present, in an ideal world with all the funding that we could possibly hope for, these are the things that we would think would be important in a governance body, right? And this is the membership that would be important. But acknowledging that there may not be that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not one thing that's been troubling me is, having served on the governance working group, and we came up with that list of 15 different people to serve on it. If we present that, and even if the legislature approves of it as is without making any changes, which is unlikely,
right.
it's not going to be their first order of business in January. By the time the legislature acts on it, it may be in a standalone bill. It may get swept up into some other bill as an add-on. Who knows what would happen? But by the time the legislature acts on it, assuming that the governor agrees and signs it, and then all of those entities that we identified all have to choose their designees to serve. At best, it might be August before that body
Yeah.
would be ready to take over for us. So to think that this task force's work is going to be done in December is not accurate.
Right. We need to have the plan for what we're going to do in the meantime while they're, and I think there's plenty to do. So.
Yeah. I was not on that committee, so I don't share the same depth of knowledge that most of you do on here. However, I wonder what are the 3 biggest or 5 biggest action items for the governance? I mean, I know it's development of standards. It's like, what else? What are the other 2 or 3 things that we would feel like have to happen right away?
We did talk about this, didn't we? Sort of the scope of
Yeah.
work. The technical and operational standards. Go ahead, Jim.
Training.
So the governance committee would develop training or approve a stock training.
Yes.
And probably deliver, well, if we had staff, they would deliver the training.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or work in consultation with existing entities, right? There was discussion about the Vermont Criminal Justice Council. And certainly, I mean, 911 board's already done some training with the Emergency Dispatch Association. So there might be other vehicles for delivery of training. So what did we say? Standards development, training and certification, really standards and program development, right? Or
the standards include policies and procedures. Both.
Actually, yeah, that would be, I would consider that like the third thing, right? So policies and procedure development.
So what does standards include then in your mind?
Standards would be like time to answer a call, time to number of. Yeah.
So those are like the benchmarks that have been discussed,
right,
related to the tier 1 recommendation. Okay.
I think so, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Then your policies and procedures would be written up to try to achieve those standards that you're looking towards.
Right.
So there's another important underlying responsibility, and that's to create an environment that engages the statewide community, the public safety community, to advance interoperability initiatives at all levels, at technology, at operations, and to foster a vision of community statewide, not just individuals or regionals. And this is what state governance boards do around the country. So yes, they guide the development or oversee or deliver on the policies and procedures and training and standardization. But importantly, they create an environment that fosters ongoing communication so that we can continually assess, understand our gaps, assess opportunities to find solutions to resolve them, and to develop initiatives that would achieve the end objectives of the broader community. And I think that's really one of it's kind of difficult to put here's what we do on that, but that's really what statewide communities, SIECs and other governing boards do in other states. And I think that was also one of the initiatives of the ECAC. And so, without an oversight body to say, we're going to meet on a regular basis and we're going to document the needs and we're going to work with the statewide community to come up with solutions. I think we're missing that right now. And that's why we have a lot of isolated initiatives going on at different levels.
Yeah. The
That's
reason I
helpful.
asked that question is because I think in the climate that we're in, with everybody asking for money in state government, I think it can't be ethereal. It can't be sort of like, well, we'll make it up as we go along kind of stuff. I think we're going to have to say, this is what they do. This is what the outcome will be if you give us money for these positions or for these, for this structure. I think we're going to have to be very specific if we want success out of it. If we kind of say, well, we're not really sure yet, we're kind of making it up, I think they're going to go, well, come back to us when you've got a plan.
Right. That's good observation too, Dan, I think.
I mean, down the road, that governance body would be the stick, really. I mean, they would be the ones to say, okay, dispatch center X, you're not meeting these benchmarks, therefore you're not meeting our expectations of dispatch center, so we're going to withhold funding, or we're going to no longer provide you with license to, these different platforms, or we're going to revoke your certification from your dispatchers or whatever. But that's down the road. That's not going to be ready in January or even next January.
Right.
I think the other thing that we should be prepared to do is to differentiate why there needs to be staff or administrative support to this compared to what we're doing now, right? So, because somebody's going to say, well, we've got a task force. How come you guys can't just be that now, or extend that, or create the ECAC, or rejuvenate the ECAC, or whatever it is? But so why do we need to fund this at a higher level than what's going on now?
Well, I think my gut reaction to that would be it's taken us a long time to get to where we are.
Yeah.
And
by the way,
we've had,
I don't disagree that we have to. I'm just saying I think we
Yeah.
better have a very clear laid out plan
Right.
as to why we need it.
Right. And we can continue to plod along as a task force as we are, but they're going to lose the time piece of that, because there's not
And
one single one of us that can put 40
Right.
hours into it.
Exactly. And they sort of launched, between this task force and the prior working group, they launched us down this path 4 years ago, and we've been plodding along, doing it on the cheap for 4
Yeah.
years.
Right.
But yet then I won't say now, but I know with the previous makeup of some of the committees, we're very critical of our lack of progress, even though they really didn't put anything into this for resources.
Right.
They pull together a band of volunteers with minimal expense and expect that we're going to have this done in 10 months time.
Right.
Well, as a veteran of the public safety system for 35 years, that's the
Right.
way we've done it.
Right.
Right. And what that experience tells me is that's exactly what they're going to expect going forward. So if we're going to ask for more, we just have to have a detailed case.
But this task force requires administrative support. You have administrative support now.
Right.
It doesn't function for nothing.
Right. Right.
I mean, you're borrowing or having administrative support lend it, but it requires that to operate.
Sure. And I don't know if it's worth being prepared with letting them know how much this has taken away from other duties of staff at DPS and the various people involved in this task force.
I think we should be prepared to say exactly that, that this is the limitations of a task force in the current configuration is the following, and list those out. I think we should also present the notion of here's the efficiencies we could gain with more resources and staff. And also here are the limitations of doing it without that, right? So if you say, keep it as it is, here's the limitations of what will happen. Here's why it will be, part-time effort.
Right. That's a lot. But I think those are all really important points.
Well, and I think we need to delicately sort of point out that you get nothing for free. I mean, one of the things that has always like confused and befuddled me about the way California does things is they have all those propositions that are on the ballot, and sometimes they come up with things like the state of California will pay like $8 billion for education, sort of mandating that the legislature do something, spend some money, but then it never addresses where they're getting the money from. And so, like I sat here, I downloaded a cool spreadsheet after our, that thing about how we, the dispatching, and somebody made the comment that any town that has a population of less than 2,000 should get their dispatching for free. So through the miracle of the internet, I downloaded the state's spreadsheet with population by town, and I determined that out of the 277 towns that are listed in the state of Vermont, 185, or 2/3, almost exactly 2/3, have a population less than 2,000. So basically, some small amount of people are going to be paying for the dispatching for everybody else. It's like, sorry, it's not free. Somebody has to pay for it. And, if your community uses it, you have to pay for it somehow. And I think it's the same with all of this, is they need to understand that if we're going to be grown-ups about this and we're going to make sure that all of our dispatching and everything works efficiently and effectively, it's going to cost some money to do that. It's not just going to happen.
So would it be okay if I just read one more time the responsibility out of Act 78 of the task force regarding governance?
Probably be a good time for that, Rick. Yeah.
A recommended governance model to ensure effective state and regional oversight, management, and continuous improvement of the system, including identification of staffing or operational needs to support such oversight and management of the system. And I obviously that there's a lot going on in that short sentence, but that's the request
that's
was
what they're looking for.
give us
yeah.
a model and tell us what it's going to cost to maintain that model. That doesn't mean they're going to accept it, but
Right.
I really like Dan's point that we should have a backup if they don't, a runway to get to that point and a backup if they're not supportive. But Ron is absolutely right, and so is Paul about we've been doing this on the cheap. The emergency, the ECAC had a primary focus, and the reason, in my opinion, it isn't still a viable entity is that it's not being managed. Who's responsible for calling the meetings? Who administers the meetings? What are the topics? We don't have topics because we don't meet on a regular basis. We don't have the administrative effort to make it viable. And I think there's a good intention there, but as Ron said, it's earlier about the props in California. How do you fund it? And so we also have a responsibility to provide some funding mechanism options. And so, yes, this task force has been asked to do. I think miraculous, create miracles, but I think we're getting close to being there. I'm optimistic that we'll have a good plan to them, but we can't predict how they're going to respond to it.
Right.
Well, then, Rick, I think that's a really good synopsis of where we are. And to that end, I think then we take the recommendation of the governance committee and consider that a best practice. So the full piece. My only hesitation from my perspective is we create a sunset, right? So let's make sure that there's a point in which we re-examine this, so it's not just a second board that's in infinity there.
Right.
But okay, so we place that up, and then. But I also agree that what we ought to do, in addition to that, is if you don't want that, here's another way. Here's the next best practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to think
May I ask a question?
Yes.
What, I'm, obviously, we on our end are going to help facilitate, the task force objectives. But what would be the second best? I mean, we'd have to come up with what is the second best option. And we want to be, I would caution us to be sure that we don't make it so easy to accomplish that they're going to just say, oh yeah, that's the way we want to go, because without some support, again, who's going to lead it? And everybody's busy. You all have full-time jobs or multiple full-time jobs. And so if and the amount of time and effort that you've all put in over the last year and a half or more on this is pretty considerable. And so who's going to take the lead on the governance if we don't have someone who's in charge of it, who doesn't have some limited administrative support staff? And so I think if Plan B, I just don't want us to have a Plan B that could set us up for failure. And so that's my caution.
Well, that's fine. And Rick, I agree with you that if we put that up front, if you say, here's the cheaper option, they're going to pick the cheaper option. But I think it at least ought to be in our back pocket, because I think headlong into this legislature, if we can even get past the executive branch, which I don't think there's any guarantee that we get this past the executive branch with growing government and increasing fees and all that kind of stuff. Let's say that we get past there. This legislature doesn't have any money. So I think the first question out of committee is going to be, how do we do this without making it super expensive going forward?
Yep.
So put that in our back pocket.
So, I agree with that, but I think that keeping that in mind, if our plan is structured such that what we're saying is by doing this correctly, by providing this oversight and effective, support and everything else, one of the aims is for us to keep the cost for this, for all of this stuff from getting out of hand and causing even more costs to the taxpayers in the future, by doing things efficiently and effectively, and actually watching where the money's going.
Yeah, that's very smart, Ron. I think that's a good point.
Okay. Paul, are you going to say something?
Yeah, I'm curious, Dan's mentioned a couple of times now that, and he's right, that before we even get to the legislature, we have to clear the fifth floor.
Yeah.
And if we don't think there's going to be any appetite for supporting the work that the task force has done, what should we be focusing on to try to gain the administration support?
I'm not sure we're going to get it for standing up a governance.
Right.
I'm not sure of that at all. I think there's very strong interest in wanting to understand how we're handling the equity issue, right? That it started with, basically with some paying and some not. In my view, there's the financial equity, and then there's also equity of service, right? That you could make an argument for. And I don't know the answer to your question.
Well,
I think they would like answers to that.
Yeah, I think, to be clear, we have an obligation to answer the legislature regardless of what the fifth floor says either way.
True.
So I think we have to put that forward. I think, however, that said, I don't think it helps us going out of the gate to be at odds with the fifth floor either, right? So in as much as we can align to their vision and allow them to help us create sort of a collaborative process, that the better off we're going to be. And I think to that end, growing government and adding staff and paying, general fund stuff out of this is not going to, there's going to be no appetite for that. And as Barb mentioned, I think where they do want to talk about is how do we make sure that we address the original issues of equity, and how do we sort out the fact that a lot of people don't pay anything, some people pay a lot. How do we make that more level set across the board?
Right. So we're going to have to come up with the governance model recommendation. And I guess plan B is going to be, if that doesn't come to be because there's no funding for it, then what are we, the task force, going to do?
Well, perhaps we should, before we go too far down the road, perhaps we should pause for a second and consider, we have a recommendation on the table, right? Of, so is it the moment to sort of quantify that and say, this is what our recommendation is, and this is what we will put forward, and then we can then work on the rest of this stuff as a action item?
I think we do need to make a decision on what we want to decide today. So when you say there's a option on the table, that is
Sounds
to
like-
take the recommendation of the working group, create a sunset, period. Separately from that would be sort of the development in our back pocket of this plan B.
Yeah.
Paul, I think I stepped on you. Go
But
ahead.
it sounds like calling the question of whether or not to endorse the recommendation of the working group.
Okay.
With the sunset language.
Was that your
What's-
motion?
Sure, I will move that the task force, what's the correct word? Endorse, accepts the recommendations of the governance working group with the understanding that it will include a recommendation of a date by which that governing body would merge with the existing E911 board.
Second.
Can I ask what the date is? Is it 5 years? Is it 2 years? Is it?
No, I think now that we're in discussion, I think that's the question, right? I think before somebody said 5 was a maximum of 5 and a minimum of 3. I think I might have heard that before.
Yes.
There shouldn't there be an option for them to make that change sooner? So no longer
True,
than,
yes, no
um,
later than.
right.
So I guess maybe this is 2025, no later than July 1 of 2030.
I would almost tether it, if I were you, I'd almost tether it to the inception of the
Yeah.
committee, right? So say 5 years from the inception of the committee or 3 years from the
Sure.
inception of the committee. Just that way, if it
Yeah.
gets delayed or,
True.
we have a difficult
True.
time staffing it.
True, it's true. This could sit on a committee wall for a year.
Okay.
So to
Anything
reiterate, I
else?
guess the motion was for the task force to adopt the recommendation of the governance working group with the understanding that it is recommended that this new group merge with the existing E911 board no later than 5 years from
Inception of the committee. The whoops, we can't hear you, Paul.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. So are we still in the discussion phase of this? I'm sorry, I'm kind of stumbling around on this part because I don't know how to work through
Yep,
it.
there's
So
been a
help me out,
motion
Paul.
made. There's been
Yeah.
a motion made and seconded, and we're in discussion.
Should this governance group, how do I want to word this? Do we need to direct that this entity merge with the 911 board at a later date, or does the governance group that is potentially going to be formed here get to make that decision about whether they should or shouldn't? Depending on where they are at I don't want to lock them into something that ends up not being workable. Of course, they could go back, right, to where they would go to the legislature to undo that, which would be
Yeah.
tough. But
Well, I mean, personally, I agree that I think the governance group, once it's established, they would be best qualified to make that decision of when. However, I sensed before that there was some lack of support for this idea, absent a date specific.
Right, right.
I'm happy enough to simply to leave it open-ended to say that we will sunset this committee at 5 years at its at 5 years after its inception. And you could say something like with the option of, right? But just so that there's some point of readdressing where this committee belongs. I'm happy enough to support it with that, but I won't without it. I won't support it without some notion of that.
With the sunset and the idea of merging it with the 911 board. Or considering at least merging it with the 911 board.
Well, I think
right?
To say that this committee will end, maybe we don't have to even just say that this committee's over at 5 years, and then we can make a determination for what its constitution will be at the conclusion of that.
It might not be a merger with the 911 board as we now know it. It may be some totally new entity that encompasses both, and both of them become obsolete.
Yep.
So we create the sunset and let the governance entity figure out what happens to the work at the end of that sunset.
Right.
Where is it going? Or are we just packing up?
We let them figure out how to put themselves out of business.
Right. Okay. So take the recommendation of a working group, create a sunset, and that's it.
Well, so I don't want to be the, like the bump on a log kind of deal, but my concern is if we create this, governance for this whole entire thing and the oversight and all of this other stuff, and then for one of multiple reasons, like the political climate gets crazy and somebody decides we need less government, the amount of money that we're spending on it could be better used for some silly project. For multiple reasons, it could just be tossed out the window, and then any work that we or the committee actually undertakes and any successes that are achieved may just get blasted right out the window, and they'll fall apart, and we'll be back where we started.
So, Ron, what's the alternative? What are you proposing?
Well, I don't know. I wanted to throw that out there. I mean, when we were talking about this, that sort of became my concern. I mean, you know how this goes. This is not for the legislature a super high priority kind of a thing. Otherwise, it would have all been fixed many years ago. I just think that we should see if we can come up with some way to provide at least some momentum to keep it going once they get to that point.
Would that be included in the if we had words in there that said the governance group would make a recommendation about where the work should fall at the end of this sunset period?
Yeah, I mean, is there some way to word the whole thing so that it essentially says that the work has to fall somewhere, or is that like overreaching?
Right.
Yeah, or could you just keep it relatively loose and say, at the sunset, the governance committee will re-examine a structure to continue the work, or something along. I'd have to wordsmith that, but we'll re-examine the structure. I don't know. I hear what you're saying though, Ron, and I think there's a way to frame it. My hesitation and my concern is I think we're making a mistake building a parallel committee. I can live with it if you say it's not going to be a parallel committee
Forever.
into infinity. Um, uh, so that's the notion of the sunset need for me.
I agree that, but if you don't create this parallel committee, who's going to do the work?
Yeah,
Because
I
if I
agree.
was on 911 board, I would not want to take this on, or any other board out there.
Right.
This is the least of all the evils.
So what if we said, take the recommendation of the working group, create a sunset. At the sunset, the governance entity will re-examine, not sure that's the right word, an appropriate structure or department or something for carrying the work forward.
And at that point, they could go to the legislature and ask to keep themselves going.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Or they
Exactly.
could say, we're going to merge with 911.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
So the governance entity will, at the end of the sunset, determine the appropriate structure for carrying the work
Administrative
forward.
body.
Those are better words. The appropriate. Do you want me to read what I think we have reworded this to?
Sure, because you probably have a better handle on it than I do at this point.
Well, I've been making some notes. So
And then
I
Paul
think-
has to accept it as a friendly amendment, right?
Oh, right. Okay, thank you. So, okay, Paul, here's the friendly amendment. So take the recommendation, the motion would be to take the recommendation of the working group to establish a governance entity, create a sunset for that entity, and include that at the sunset, that governance entity will determine an appropriate administrative body for carrying the work forward.
I am agreeable to that.
Okay, now what do I do
I
with the
second that.
motions and stuff?
Right.
Okay, we had a second.
And
Okay,
Jim was the original second, so if he's agreeable to it, then we can
okay,
discuss it some more or vote on it.
okay. And so, having said that, is there any more discussion on this? All right. We will go to a vote then. All in favor of accepting the motion that's on the floor, right? Raise your hand or signify by saying aye.
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 Okay. Did I hear Ron? Was that
You
an aye
did.
from you?
I
Okay.
heard him. Yeah.
Okay,
Here, I'll
excellent.
raise my hand too.
Okay, I saw it. Thank you. Okay, so that motion has passed. Okay, that felt like a lot. Thank you all. Let's see where we are on the agenda. Actually, on the agenda, I have organic and inorganic working group discussions. And I thought we completed that last week, or do we have more?
We did that last week, yes.
Okay, so that was an error. So there's nothing to discuss here. No need for an executive session. New business. I do have a little bit of new business I want to update you on, but does anyone else have new business? Okay, so I just wanted to let you know that I was invited this morning, or I was invited to give a presentation this morning about the work of the task force to the Vermont EMS Advisory Committee. So I presented to them essentially what we gave to the 911 board, that's, about 3 weeks ago, on the status of all the preliminary recommendations and so on and so forth. And I just wanted to report that they are very interested in having input on the development of any requirements should the CAD to CAD project become a recommendation. They are hoping to ensure that any system also be interoperable or integratable with existing systems that they use in the field. And they named a couple that I'm not really familiar with, but I think it was worth probably some exploration, when we get to the point of developing an RFP. The recommendation was also made, and this came from Dr. Dan Wolfson, who is the board's medical control. So I've been aware of this idea for some time and should have brought it forward to this group sooner. But I was reminded that this might be the good time to include a recommendation for the funding of an implementation of an electronic protocol system for use by call takers and ultimately dispatchers, right? Because we're going to be developing these standardized protocols and procedures. We currently use paper-based protocols provided by a company called APCO. They're very customizable to Vermont, which is what appealed to us about them. And they are among the most cost-effective solutions out there, in my view. So we don't need to consider this now. I don't know where that recommendation might want to be considered. Is it probably in with the protocol discussion, right? The development of protocols and policies and all of that. So what working group was that? And does it need to go back to that working group?
That would be tier 3.
Tier 3. Would it make sense to get tier 3 together again and have a little bit longer discussion about this and see if we want to include it in the working group recommendation to the full task force or not? Or not include it? Who was on tier 3? I was. Jim. Was that Michael?
Michael Wright.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yep. And I thought we did discuss some of this, maybe not in great detail, but certainly we talked about it as far as protocols.
Yes.
We definitely talked about standardized ones. I don't know that we ever got to, the platform that should be used.
I don't think it's necessary for us to discuss the platform. It's whatever we can integrate into the system ultimately. I'd prefer to see it electronically, but.
Well, it would be a funding question too, because we don't have the money for it. So.
Right.
All right. I'm not sure what to do with the topic. Do we want to have a quick working group meeting or no?
I don't think it's needed. I think once we get there with the RFP or start actually putting together the CAD, that'll come back up as discussion again.
Right. Except the funding piece. So maybe it needs to go to the funding group. I'm just concerned about having a recommendation out there and with absolutely no funding mechanism.
Could you provide more insight into the solution and a ROM budget so that we could consider what it is and see if we, because right now we have a ROM budget for CAD. If we're going to add an additional application into that, it's important to know what the application is and to have a understanding of its upfront cost and ongoing maintenance.
I have those figures from a few years ago for work for the 911 board that we didn't actually go forward with. They might be outdated, but it could be helpful to take a look at and then be able to make, a guess at what the cost might be now. And you'd also have to include the fact that it wouldn't serve just 911 call takers. It would be a broader user pool, right? Okay, so this is where we'll leave it. I'll dig that information up and get it to Rick and Dom and see if it's useful. Does that make sense?
Yes, and integrate it into the CAD proposal.
Okay. Okay. Any other new business? It is time for public comment then. Well, we have Phil and Jason. You're not really public commenters, but here's an opportunity to speak if you have anything to add at this point.
Not at this time, thanks.
No, I'm fine. Thank you. I appreciate the chance to join you today and listen to the discussions. Very interesting.
Great. Glad you're here. Okay, then. Next on the agenda is to confirm the next meeting date and adjourn. So the next regular meeting is on the books for November 12th, next Wednesday at 11:15. I'll work with Emily to make sure the meeting is warned appropriately. I did have a question, Emily. Does the holiday on Tuesday, Veterans Day, does that impact when we should be warning this meeting, or can it still be done on Monday, or should it be done sooner?
It's calendar days, so it shouldn't.
Okay. Okay. So, all right. On my little checklist, then I've just noted the deadline as Monday at 11:15. Okay. All right. Is there anything else for today? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you,
Second.
Ron. Thank you, Jim. All in favor of adjourning, raise your hand or signify by saying aye.
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 All righty. Thank you very much, everybody. The meeting's adjourned, and we will talk to you all soon. That was a lot of thinking work today, in my view. So, I appreciate everybody's
Very good.
hard work.
Thank you.
Talk
Thank
to
you,
you soon.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.